Welcome to the Introduction to Graded Assignment number 4. This one's called HTML Me Something. I'm going to talk about the core concepts covered by this assignment and then go over the instructions and the starter code and talk about the different tasks. Then I'll give you some tips and mention some common issues that might pop up that you might have to deal with. Then a couple of reminders and point you to some extra prep resources on my website. So the core concepts are primarily chapters 20 and 21. This is focused on HTML and CSS. So for HTML, you're going to need to demonstrate structural elements, images, an HTML entity, and there's going to be some specific elements they want you to use. Then for CSS, you need to have an external style sheet and demonstrate different selector types and have styling both in terms of layout and also visual styling. Then you also need to demonstrate to us that you are using Git in a way that is setting a foundation for your career as a developer. So make sure you're making multiple commits as you go. That's going to be something your eyes are going to be checking for. So other skills would be just project planning and execution. This is the type of project where you really need to think about what you want to do and where you're going to go before you can get started. And we also want to see some creativity. That being said, you don't have to be a graphic designer. So we do not expect anyone to have a super elaborate or sleek, look to this. Mostly you just need to have fun and make it reflect your own personality and style. And you'll be able to do that very easily with some very simple CSS and HTML. So let's take a look at the overview of everything. The instructions are at this link, and you could come here and see that assignment 4 HTML Me Something is right here. And there's an introduction and tasks 1, 2, and 3. And 3 is just the wrap up and submitting. So there's really just primarily 2 tasks. So the big picture here is that you are going to create a page that just shares something out of your life experience and just use some words and some pictures to do it. And so this could be maybe some trip you took that you want to show off and tell us about. And maybe it's a hobby or an interest of some kind, something you're passionate about. Maybe it's your career plans or something about your career that you want to talk about. Be creative. You can come up with whatever you want to do, really. But you do need to plan it out before you start. So just think through what you want to communicate. How do you want to tell this story? And what types of things are you going to need in order to demonstrate it? To get started, they will give you the link to the starter code repo. And then, of course, as always, don't forget to fork it and enable GitHub Actions, then clone it to your local machine and do npm install to get those dependencies installed. So let's just go over to this first page here. Yeah, so they're talking a little bit here about what you're going to do. And the main thing to note here is that the 2 parts of the exercise, the very first one's focused on the HTML and the second one's focused on the CSS. So you can just do one and then go to the other. So here's the link for the repository. And they tell you a little bit, about the setup here. Okay, so let's talk about the file structure. The package.json file will have those dependencies when you run npm install. All of that should do what it needs to do, and then you'll see the node modules and node modules and the package lock JSON file show up after you've done that. The files that you can modify are index.html and styles.css. You also will be adding an images directory right alongside these as part of your instructions. And then there's the test directory that has that autograder file, and you can run those tests with the command npm test. So all of that is right here. If we look at the index.html file here, you can see that they've given you the primary tags you need, but there's nothing in the head and there's nothing in the body. So you're going to need to add the things that belong here to fill out your page. And then the styles.css file is also empty. It's a blank slate. So you're going to be able to put whatever styles you want to make this work. And they're going to give you some direction on some specific things you need to have, but you can otherwise just do whatever you want. So that's the files. Let's talk about task 1. The focus of this is the HTML. So you're going to put all of your HTML in this file, index.html. You need to have 3 to 10 paragraphs or sections, and the unit test will check to see if you have less than 3 or greater than 10, so 3 to 10. And then there's going to be some specific required elements. At a glance, I'll tell you, you have to have at least one of a paragraph, a header, a footer, a main section, an article section, and then an image. You also need to have at least one HTML entity. And they really don't want you to use any CSS yet, and I have to echo that advice. It is a good idea for you to get the content on the page, get it all, put where you want it in the flow of the page from top to bottom, just the content with no styling. So if your assignment looks like it's 1997 at this point, you are doing it right. If you do run NPM test at this point, you'll be passing 3, maybe 4 tests, but you definitely won't be passing all of them because some of them do depend on the CSS. And don't forget to be making git commits during this process. You should already have a few by the time you've added all this content a little bit at a time. Okay, let's take a look at the instructions for this part too, just to make sure you see this. Yeah, so here's where they talk about kind of what you're going for, ideas on what type of thing you might decide to do for your page. And the list of things you have to have, the image, the HTML entity, and they mention here they want you to demonstrate creativity, just have fun. They have some notes and tips here too. Make sure you take a look at all of these. They've got some good ideas on things that'll help you get through this a little bit more smoothly. Okay, let's talk about task 2, the styling. So once you've got your content pretty much set, you can move on to task 2 and work on the CSS. You'll need to place all your CSS in styles.css. They really do not want you doing inline styling or internal styles if possible. They would like to see you use this style sheet separately. Then make sure you link it properly in index.html so that the browser can pick up those styles and apply it to your content. You need to use margin and padding properties around different places to arrange your content on the page with some blank space around it, because when things are all crammed together, it doesn't look very nice. And then make sure you're using at least one of each type of selector. So you need to have an element selector, a class selector, and an ID selector. You'll probably have multiple of some, at least, 1 or 2 of them. But definitely you have to have at least one of each. And then you need to apply some specific styles and names for the body and your primary heading element and a paragraph. So let's take a look at what it says about that. Okay, so here in task 2, they mention the margin and padding. They mention the 3 different types of selectors. And then here they tell you to follow some specific rules. They want you to give the body a margin value of 8 pixels and a display type of block. They also want your heading on your page, your main heading, to have an ID called main heading. And they want you to use that ID selector in styles.css to apply some sort of styling to the heading. Then you should find a paragraph on your page, so something with a P tag, and give it the ID of test P and then a class name of fun paragraph, and then use the class selector for that class name in the CSS to apply some styling. And you'll need to explain all of this, to your TA during your review. Other than that, you can do whatever you want. That really is all they require you to do. And so they just remind you here about a couple things. And one of the things that they have on both of these are these examples of a page that was done by a guy who helped come up with a lot of the curriculum stuff in the early days. His name is Chris Bay. And so we should definitely take a look at that, but I'm going to do that in just a minute. So just to wrap up the tasks here, you can run npm test at the end and ensure all 7 of the tests are passing. There is one caveat here, and that's that currently, unless they have updated it by the time you watch this, the 5th and 6th tests in the file have these additional expectations where they're looking for specific colors. Like this one says, including the color green and including the color red. They no longer require that. It's not in the instructions anymore, but these expectations were still in the starter code when I looked today. So if these 2 lines that I have commented out here are still in your tests, then they're probably not going to pass unless you have done that. So I'm going to say that it's okay for you to comment these out. Ordinarily, we say do not touch the tests, right? You need to leave the tests alone. But I'm pretty sure they're going to be taking these out. And so it's okay to do that so that your tests are passing everything that they say in the instructions as required. And you're not having to specifically have something green and have something red. That way you can just stick to exactly your design that you want to go with and use whatever colors you would like. Then make one last commit and push to GitHub after your tests are passing and submit your repo link on Canvas. And then, of course, let your IA know that you're ready to set up a demo. So, common issues and tips. Generally speaking, make sure you're reading the instructions thoroughly. They do have some very specific requirements for a number of things. So make sure you don't miss any of those. Plan out your page before you start. So I said this already, but it is important when you are the person designing a project to take the time to do this. So think about what you want to say, what your content's going to be, what order you'd like to say it in, how you'd like to group your information so that it's easy to kind of see it in sections, and what pictures you might have, what links you might have. Think about all of that ahead of time and really know for sure where it is you're headed before you start putting in the work to do the coding. Do not cut and paste from another page somewhere. You can certainly reference websites all over the place, but the intention here is for you to build this from scratch yourself, and there's no reason you can't do that because you really are only expected to use basic HTML and CSS. Okay, make those frequent Git commits since they'll be checking for that. And don't forget to check your results in the browser as you go. I highly recommend using the live server extension in VS Code. And that way it updates constantly. And this is a really important part of developing a web application is keeping an eye on the reality check to make sure that your code is actually producing what you expect it to. Use the browser dev tools to inspect the elements and maybe, check your styling changes or try out styling changes right there in the browser, kind of like you did for your Chapter 20 studio, where you can just play around with it right there in the browser. And then if you find something you like, take note of it and go actually set it up in your CSS so it's a permanent change. Make sure to clean up your code before submitting any unused code or unnecessary comments. Make sure your indenting and line spacing and everything is correct. And then you should be in pretty good shape. So for task 1, use online resources like W3 Schools for info on, all of the HTML elements that are out there, the HTML entities. There are so many good resources out there where you can learn more than we have taught you so that you can find exactly what it is you're looking for to make your page do what you want it to do. Don't start on your CSS until the content's set. I mean it when I say that, you still want it to look like the 90s. Use online resources for task 2 as well. You can get a lot of information about CSS properties and their function, but I have to caution you, do not overdo it. This really is meant to be a very short, simple assignment so that you can just move on to graded assignment 5 right after. So if you have grand plans to have all sorts of cool animations and, this and that, you're probably not going to have time to do all of that. It's going to be outside the scope of this assignment. So take all of that energy and that desire and save it for future other assignments, because you will have a chance to dig into those kinds of things eventually. But for this assignment, do keep it simple. To give you a good example of what you might do, let's take a look at the example page that they've got here. So in the task 1 section right here, you can see they've got a link to this example. This is Chris Bay's example where it says places I've lived, and he has a whole list of all these different places. And then he, goes through them one by one. And these are actually linked to, these spots. So you can jump around if you want to, like go down to London and, go through. But he's got a little bit of text and pictures for each section. And, everything is nicely organized. And then, he's got a little footer here with a copyright symbol and all that kind of stuff. And this is just the HTML, right? There's no CSS applied here. So this is what you're going for, is something that looks this plain, essentially, for just task 1. Then when we get to task 2, you'll see down here that they have another example. This is the styled example of that same page. So now we can see that, the links are in line and they aren't bullet points. They're styled a little differently. You have margins on either side here, or it might be padding. We should probably take a look. Let's actually do that. Let's open the Dev Tools and take a look here. Okay. So the way he's done this, actually, in this case, is to have a max width of 1024 pixels to make sure that this section never gets wider than that. And then the margins are set to 0 and auto, which means that when auto is set for left and right, it just means that if you have a max width, it's just going to automatically have an equal amount on both sides once it gets to the point where your screen is actually wider than the max width. So that's one way to accomplish it. But yeah, everything is spaced out nicely. The text isn't right up against the edges here. It's actually got a little bit of padding. There's, a different font. And there's, kind of some nice colors here, some nice neutral colors. Looks like he went for a very simple and clean look here. So again, it's not fancy, but it does the job. This is all we're really looking for, as long as it meets all of the requirements of the assignment. And it looks like something that someone wants to read and learn something about you, then you have done your job. Okay. So, a few things to remember. Make sure you share your code only with your IAs. You can't get your help from your classmates or other people on graded assignments. If you're stuck, try to figure things out on your own. You'll learn a lot this way, especially messing around with CSS, because like using the dev tools to inspect the CSS and figure out like what's being applied where, like if I take that away, or if I take this away, this is a great way for you to debug and figure out what's affecting what. So definitely use those tools to your advantage. Make sure you're, rereading the instructions. If you think maybe you didn't catch something quite right, go reference other materials. And then there's always the advice to walk away for a little bit if you need to, and then come back, right? You can get help from your IAs during office hours or other times when they're available. And just make sure you're staying in communication with them so they know if you're struggling and kind of where you are in the assignment, and, take advantage of their support and guidance. I do have a couple of prep assignments for this graded assignment. One is called As Easy as Apple Pie, and it's just a very straightforward little web page with my apple pie recipe. And I just go through, and it gave me a chance to kind of show that I could, do these different sections and use some lists and use a little bit of color and, float some images on the right and things like that. So this one is very straightforward, and it's very much in line with the scope of your assignment. Small business savvy would be for those of you who already know a little bit about this stuff and might want to learn a little more. It employs a layout system called Flexbox and has a couple of extra little things with the graphics and the CSS or whatnot. So that would be kind of a little bit next level. If you are an absolute beginner, I recommend just doing the apple pie one. Okay, that's all I've got for you. Have fun with this assignment and just know that your IAs are really looking forward to seeing your assignment. We always do.